All right, well, welcome to Parenting Special Needs, Family Chat Live, the battle over food. I'm Shantae. And is there a battle over food in your home? Does your loved one eat one or two foods like chicken nuggets and macaroni and cheese? Or does your loved one engage in ritualistic eating behaviors like no foods can touch and they have to be a certain color? Or does your family experience tantrums during mealtime? Or like my household, where my daughter eats so fast and shoves so much into her mouth that sometimes she actually chokes. Well, in tonight's family chat, we're going to discuss the battle over food and similar situations. And we want to welcome all of you and ask that you share, send a question, type into Facebook page so that we can find out about your situations and if you have strategies that you've tried in your household that might be helpful to us. These family chats are led and sponsored by the following organizations: Parenting Special Needs Magazine, Home and Community Positive Behavior Support Network, Positive Behavior Support Corporation, Parent to Parent USA, and the Partnership for People with Disabilities at Virginia Commonwealth University. And we thank them very much. And please join me in welcoming our panel of parent professionals as they share their experiences, knowledge, strategies, and solutions to help all of us. And our first distinguished panelist is Lauren Andelin. Welcome, Lauren. So why don't you start and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Thank you, Shantae. I'm Lauren Andelin. I am an occupational therapist. I've been practicing since 2009, and my interest areas are in sensory integration and special sensory processing disorders. I've since 2020 been transitioned to faculty at Virginia Commonwealth University. So I have the pleasure of teaching OTs that are going to be going into the field, so future OTs, and I'm excited to be here tonight. I also have 3 of my own children. My oldest, I have a few stories that I'm going to share later. She is 11 and has ADHD, and we've definitely had challenges with her eating. So I'm coming here today with 2 hats on, and I think that I can really share the perspective of what it's been like to be a parent and an occupational therapist, and how my perspective has changed somewhat since being in the parent seat. And I will move to Tara. You're next on my screen.
Oh, great. Well, hello, everyone. My name is Tara Cessna. I am a board certified behavior analyst, and I have been working in the field since 2003. I have worked with many families and individuals that struggle with, food sensitivities, selectivity, binge eating, hoarding food. And I'm just here to really share some of the strategies that helped these families get through those tough times and help them to engage in really helpful eating habits and beneficial eating habits. So I'm happy to be here today, and thank you for having me, everyone. I'm going to pass it to Miss Flip Gray.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I am Flip Gray. I'm also from Virginia Commonwealth University, where I serve as the family faculty and training director for our leadership, education, and neurodevelopmental disabilities program. That family piece is what's coming in strong in these family chats. I am the mother of 2 children. My eldest is a 19-year-old adult with an array of disabilities. So we have lived 19 years of experience and gained some wisdom that I hope that some of the stories that I can share and solutions are going to help everyone out today. And I'm going to pass this over to Laura.
Hi, everyone. Sorry for not having my a photo up there. We've been shifting a little bit today. I'm Laura Kern. I'm a professor at University of South Florida. I got into special education and got a PhD after my son was diagnosed with autism. Now he's got anxiety and ADHD, so we got a little trifecta going on. But I'm here as a parent tonight because this topic is so essential to us. We have been dealing with overeating, binge eating, obesity really since he was 3. My husband jokes that it started when he was breastfeeding and wouldn't stop, and I had to put a little timer on because I didn't know what else to do. So we've been dealing with this for a long time, and hopefully we'll share a little bit more of our experiences and learn from all of you guys on what we can do as family members to address it. And Emily, do you want to share? You're going to be doing the Facebook Live monitoring.
Sure, I'll just say a quick hello. My name is Emily. I'm a doctoral student at the University of South Florida, and I'll be monitoring the chats. We already have over 11 people on Facebook and some really lively discussion going on about some food aversion and having parents that are talking about their children that have had food processing and different issues for over 20 years. So some great conversation going on Facebook already.
Wonderful.
Okay, so we also wanted to ask if you have any questions, if you guys want to share anything that's going on in your family or share a story with us. We would love to hear it.
I do see something that came in here. If you can see some of the chat, they have a 6-year-old son with sensory processing and auditory processing, currently undergoing testing for ASD. Takes a minimum of 2 to 3 hours to complete a full meal. He's not picky, but does have a few food aversions, such as applesauce, and will not allow his food to touch. We have special plates with 3 to 4 dividers, which do help. He will smell everything before touching it and prefers to eat with his hands when able. Eating has become a point of contention at our home and at school. Does anyone have insight as to how to better assist him in eating during the reasonable time frame? Lauren, do you want to take some of that and then I can add to it?
Sure. And just to clarify, the question was advice on the time frame because it takes a long time. Is that right?
2 to 3 hours, very picky, foods can't touch, has aversions, and it's just a point of contention now across environments.
So I'm going to talk in a little bit about kind of the sensory experience and how we as adults approach our food and kind of thinking of it from that perspective. And I think that also helps as a parent and as a caregiver to reframe kind of how we think about it, because it then can give a little bit more insight into how our children are approaching food that's unfamiliar. I think in terms of the timing, I'm wondering how much anxiety is built up because of it's become such a point of contention. And if that, I guess I have more questions for the person that asked that about what is it that's taking so long? Is it that like the child's getting up from the table and coming back? Is it that they're already are using strategies? And I don't know if that's something we can answer, but I think it sounds like the strategy of the plate is a really good one for not having them touch. And Tara, do you have any other suggestions on that end?
So yeah, and again, we don't know your child, and this is not something, we're blanket giving some advice. Obviously, you would want to make sure that you're talking to professionals. But for the timeframes, sometimes we want to really have something to look forward to. So if there's really nothing happening after the meal time, that is something that is a positive. So if I eat my breakfast, then I go to school, boo. If I eat my dinner, then I get a bath and go to bed, boo. What are the things that I can look forward to? So it'd be like a first I eat and then I get to, and it's something that they really enjoy doing, engaging in, and letting them know like what they have to do to finish. What does that look like? A finished plate. It doesn't necessarily have to be a clean plate. It does mean that you have to eat 3 bites of this, 2 bites of that, a bite of that, and then we're all done. Things of that nature. So trying to build in, some momentum for them, giving them something to look forward to afterwards. For the aversions, again, and we're going to share more stories on this, but how do we get them excited and taking ownership of those food choices? And we're going to share a little bit more about that a little bit later. So hopefully that can kind of help expand their repertoire for the different foods that they're willing to try. And stories from our panelists.
Well, go ahead. Flip, did you want to take it?
I can. However we want to roll with this. I know 19 years, that's a lot of stories. And as Shantae had started off in the beginning here, there's a number of different reasons that food can be a challenge. So one story that I'd like to share was when my daughter was younger and didn't have any food restrictions dietarily, or limitations. How about that? She limited herself, and I think this is kind of common that we see what's called an autism diet. That's like chicken nuggets and pizza, Pop-Tarts, hot dogs, mac and cheese, high carbs, not highly processed foods. And during that time, she was having some gastrointestinal issues. And so we were seeing a gastrologist. Yes, I think that's how we say it. And they determined that we needed to go on a gluten-free and dairy-free diet. And those were like the staples of her diet. So big panic, making that change, but we did it. And some of the things that we tried were creating pantry space that was specifically for her, that were labeled with hearts and her name, so she knew that was hers, and it became special to her. Like, that's my pantry shelf. Nobody can touch that. We did the same thing with the refrigerator. And we had to try a lot of things. So I don't know how many people here are on gluten-free diets or any of those limitation diets, but those foods are not always comparable to what everyone else is eating. So it was a lot of taste testing and trying. And we got there. Now we know what's good. I'm on a gluten-free diet with her. So I know exactly what she went through and what she's eating now, and success. Now her diet has expanded. She's eating foods that I never thought she would touch, like guacamole and sushi. So perhaps folks in the audience can relate to that and have additional questions on how to, overcome some of the barriers.
So if we have to ask if anyone wants to share, our challenges is like what I said in the very beginning. Kaylee, well, I shouldn't use names, I'm sorry. She overstuffs, like if we're sitting down and let's just say there was a hamburger and we all had turkey burgers, whatever, hers would be gone before we even had one bite. And it's just like she almost eats her food whole. And it is concerning, and the fact that she overeats and stuff. So I'm interested in finding out, like, some strategies to help with that.
I was going to say, Shantae, it sounds so much like some of what we've been going through with my son and the overeating and kind of like that binge, like eating and swallowing almost whole food.
Right.
And we've been struggling with it for a bunch of years. We've now tried more of like a medical approach. So we went to the Children's Hospital Clinic, and we've got all sorts of like specialists, nutritionists, physical therapists, psychologists, and all of these experts trying to help us. But we don't see, it's been a couple of months, a lot of appointments, and we don't really see any major changes. And part of that is, I think that there's some stuff going on that's internal, that has to do with some of the OT, occupational therapy stuff that Lauren has been sharing with us through this talk. And hopefully that we'll be using some of that to help my son like actually identify some of the things that's going on, because he says he's always hungry, like he can't stop being hungry, and we're hoping that maybe like some of these strategies we can try with him, because the whole medical model approach hasn't totally worked for us.
Okay.
Laura, I was muted. I wonder too, Laura, have you looked at like restricting your food times so you only eat during these periods of time, and then limiting access to certain foods, and because if he has the free reign and if he's able to access food at all hours, that can be challenging. And then it depends on the choices that you also have available, right? So we want to make sure that the food that is accessible is, those healthier choices. They could be a lesser preferred, but certainly we don't want to stock the house with the cookies and the chips and the ice cream with free reign. So starting to learn about meal times being specific times of the day and then locking it up or taking it away. Like it's just gone. That's not when we eat. But that would be modeled by yourself and the family too. We would all put ourselves on that diet. So it's not just him that can't eat at those times. We have breakfast, lunch, dinner, maybe a snack, and these are the available times for that food. And that's it.
Yeah, and one of the things we've been trying to do is just sit down together, at least one of us with him for dinner, because what we're finding is that like he was eating on his own and not sitting with us. So that's something we've been trying to have, like a set dinner time or
Good.
time eating in a place. And then the other thing is when he goes to school, we found out that lunch is at like 11:30 and he was eating at home breakfast and then eating 11:30 and then he'd come home starved. So he was actually eating an extra meal every day. So we're still working on like sending in snacks and stuff, but yeah, it has helped like with little strategies like that, but
Yeah,
I'd like to just bang, like, like he's, we do this and like, kind of like, 20 pounds are gone and then we, or probably 100 are gone and then we can move on. But yeah, it's been interesting.
It's going to take time. I just saw somebody in the chat posted, using smaller plates too, thinking about the size of the plate, because if my plate is the big plates, I can put so much food on that, right? Like, so if I'm limiting those sizes, that's also something that hopefully can be helpful. And I appreciate someone sharing that. There are a lot of comments and questions coming through. I don't know if you all wanted to take some time to read them or if you want to continue with our panel discussions.
Um,
I'm kind of looking through as well. I see a mix of the autism diet, as Flip called it, concerned about things being unhealthy and that's all their children will eat. There was a question I think I saw about knowing whether when it's an issue versus just like a typical quote unquote picky toddler. Oh, I see something here from Christina about what I would call a food jag. That gets hooked on certain foods for days, sometimes weeks at a time, and that's all he will eat. How do you introduce new foods in that situation? And one thing I will say right off the bat from the parent perspective, and again, my view, I think my advice and like ways of looking at it have changed since I've had to live it some, is obviously from a medical standpoint, your child needs to be getting the nutrients they need. And I think that there are certain doctors that will say like, oh, when they're hungry enough, they'll eat and it's fine. And that's not always the case, especially with children that truly do have sensory issues, that have special needs, that might just not eat. But I think that I, as a parent, have had to let go sometimes wanting my children to eat all of the healthy things, knowing that they're getting a little bit of it and it's enough. And what I've noticed is that when I give them more of the control, that they'll end up coming back to the food that they might have rejected before. My daughter, I hadn't talked about this story, but my oldest is the one that's the pickiest, and she's gotten a lot better. But when she was 2, I was probably around that time, I had always been giving her eggs because I felt like as long as she's eating eggs, she's getting the protein. It's kind of like the magic food. And that was kind of my go-to. It was like peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. And for some reason I thought eggs. And she hit a day when she was like, suddenly like, I don't like eggs anymore, and literally has not touched them. And that was when she was 2, again, probably until she was like 10. And she's just now started, when we make them and I make them and I always offer them, and she still never tried it, has started just saying like, I want to try it. And she's had a little bit, and she still does it. She's like, I know why I didn't like them then, but she still has like taken the control back, and she's starting to want to try them. And I've noticed as I've let go of some of that control and given it to her, she's picked up some stuff back on her own.
Yeah, that's great. Some of the strategies I've done with some families is we do the rainbow, what I call the rainbow. And so we bring our rainbow cards to the grocery store, and they come with me, and they get to pick foods. We go to the produce section. They have to pick foods that are of that color. So if we're looking for red foods, it can be, a tomato or a strawberry, whatever they want. We talk about the texture. We look at the size. We talk about, how it smells, and we start selecting food items, from that. And then when we get home, we start thinking about how we want to prepare it. Is it something that needs to be cooked? Is it something that we can eat raw? Do we want to mix it with something? Do we want to add sugars or juices or whatever to it? And so, trying to get them engaged in eating those foods and exposed to those foods, having ownership and control really is quite important. And we take it slow at first. It's accepting it on the plate while their other preferred foods are there. Over time, it's bringing it to their mouth and accepting it, and then reinforcing them again with that preferred food. And then finally, we're biting it and we're swallowing it. And then huge reinforcement is coming from that. And really trying to restrict those very preferred foods. And even if it's candy, if you have a bite of the strawberry, that's when you're going to get, some of these Skittles. But first, you have to have that. And it's really this first, then if you do this, then you'll get that. We really want to make sure that we are exposing them, that we're also modeling a healthy diet, that we're eating a variety of foods, that we're not restricting. Because if we see that we only eat 3 foods and we're expecting our loved ones to eat, 10 to 11, well, this is not what they've been learning. So we want to think about how, we're exposing them to those foods as well. I just saw on the chat too, somebody had talked about like the social stigmas, right? If we have to do certain things in our home, in this instance, this parent is cutting up the food very small for like a toddler, but this individual is not that. How does this look when they're working, when they're with their peers? And the challenges too become, what's the reinforcer for the individual? Do they find it meaningful to have those social engagement? Do they find that it's embarrassing to have their food small like that, or do they not have a problem with it? And again, some of those things aren't stigmas, and really we might just see them as that, but their peers are like, it's no problem. Jenny eats her strawberries extra small. It's just what she does. It's not necessarily a big deal. But if you find that they're being ostracized, they're not really being included, or people are teasing or picking, that's when we start saying, okay, what can we do differently? In this environment, we can cut our food up really small, but when we're here, we're going to, eat them whole or break them apart, or, really kind of start modeling that. But it's not until we see those natural consequences of somebody excluding our loved ones, then we say, now we've got to make a change.
My brother was always used to order, he was really picky, and he always used to order chicken and broccoli from Chinese restaurants with no broccoli. He would say, I want chicken and broccoli, no broccoli. And when he started dating his now wife, he started eating chicken and broccoli with broccoli, and now he likes it, because he had the consequence of feeling embarrassed that, and he has ADHD and is neurodiverse. And he didn't really care about those consequences until it really meant something to him when he was it was past college age. So that's just kind of a silly story, but I think it really does show that if it's not, sometimes these things that are important to us as caregivers might not be a natural consequence for our kids yet. So typically they will, I think, figure it out.
Agree. And certainly trying to, when I expose them to new things, it's the way that they want to eat them. So I had an individual who never ate fruits or vegetables. We started to get her to eat salads, but she didn't like salads. I noticed that she would eat those fried chicken sandwiches from Popeyes, and what's on there, there's a slice of lettuce. So I recognized, she has ketchup with that. So we started putting lettuce on her plate with ketchup on it. And now she eats salads with ketchup. And you know what? Who cares? I don't care. Her parents are fine with it. She's cool with it. She's eating salad now. So yeah, there's ketchup on it, but that's how we started to transition, noticing those little things that, how can we shape that a little bit more? And so now I'm just adding extra lettuce. I'm taking away the bun and the chicken, and this is what we're going to do for you.
Those are all great. And I saw in the chat also that somebody was responding to the story that I shared. And number one, I feel you. Don't give up hope. It is all possible. To answer your question about whether or not we just transition to the same foods in the gluten-free, dairy-free vein of things, yes, we did, because we knew that's what she would eat. And then as time went on, we brought in different strategies to make food fun and personable. So like, naming and decorating those shelves that were just for her. But then I eat diverse foods, always have, love that. Introduced it to my kiddos. and found that I had to do it in a fun way. So like hot dogs, I would make into octopi. So it just a couple of cuts and then you fry it up and it looks like a little octopus. Or we would decorate the plate into scenes, broccoli was trees and maybe a little goldfish floating through. So just doing some things like that also can make it a little bit more attractive for the kiddos to try to eat.
Lauren, you want to have it go on to the next? Are we ready to move on?
Sure.
To
Yeah. And I did one other story that I was going to share about my daughter. And I think that this may be, I'm not sure, I haven't been able to monitor everything in the chat, but she started medicine for ADHD. So she's on a stimulant and it started when she was 10. So she's already a very kind of picky eater, restrictive eater, and very small. And it's always been a concern of ours with her weight. And in addition to that, it exacerbates some of her symptoms and like her emotional instability when she's not eating well. She gets hangry like we all do. And with the medication, if anyone has a child on a stimulant medication, they tend to decrease appetite. And again, as a parent versus an OT, I've had to really look at I've kind of let some things go. And if she wants, when her medicine wears off and it might be after gymnastics and it's 8 o'clock at night, if she's like, let me go to McDonald's and get fries and chicken nuggets, I'm happy that she's eating that. And it's been, and as I've let go of some of that control and kind of let that happen, it's seemed to take the anxiety away from our whole family with it. And it doesn't show up as much as a problem. So I think sometimes realizing that it's okay to have some of those not healthy foods if, your child is choosing to eat it. So with that, I want everybody that is on the panel and in the on the chat and everywhere on Facebook, I want you to take about 20 or 30 seconds and just imagine you've just walked into a restaurant with a buffet. I know when I was growing up, we went to the Sizzler, which is a big New Jersey restaurant. And that's where I'm from. And or like Golden Corral. So think about, you walked in, kind of what sense do you notice first? Or what about the environment do you notice? Put yourself there.
I'll start. It's really loud.
Okay, I added music on my slide. See, I didn't even have to put that there. So sound is big for you.
The smells for sure.
I'm smelled too. I smell somebody in the chat, I think, said that somebody said something about smelling things first.
Yes.
I'm a big smell.
Smells and germs is what
somebody
they
just
said.
I would say
Okay.
there's so many
Germs.
people.
I didn't even think, yeah, that's it probably was already there, but COVID has brought that out as well.
I'd say just like the amount of choices, like
So
sometimes-
overwhelmed, like anxiety of like internal, that interoceptive sense maybe of how you feel inside. Overwhelmed.
Yeah. And also like a lot of times it's set up, there are so many tables and so many people heading to the food. Like, I don't know, like, can I cut in front and go to where the salad is? Like, I don't know what the rules are for how to get the food at the buffet.
Okay. I didn't even,
So
that's
then
like not even something I would think about. So because you like to know, so you like to have a plan and you like to know the rules. And when you don't, you feel overwhelmed, which that happens a lot in life.
Yeah. And then when I get overwhelmed, then I'm like, okay, look at that fried chicken. That looks really good. Let me grab a plate of it. No one else is around it. And then I go sit and eat the fried chicken and forget everything else.
Okay. That is very interesting, Laura, because that makes me think of someone that when we talk about kids that are sometimes eating without noticing what they're eating, that more overeat. And we'll talk about that in a second, but sort of like the muting of that's helping to kind of dull that overwhelmed feeling. Anything else come out in the chat? Or everyone just agrees with those
I don't
things?
see anything else in the chat, but I'll also add that I've had some pretty bad stuff on a buffet. And so I get a little anxious about, is this good?
Because you're an adult, so you know that the child might not be thinking about that, but yeah. Am I gonna have a stomach ache? So also that's a good point. I think that when we think about like the relationship to our feelings and food, and if we've had bad experiences with smell or taste, how that then becomes a trigger and something we avoid. Like if I know for the same daughter that I've been talking about, she avoided oranges or clementines and like any kind of citrusy stuff for a really long time because she got car sick when she had a bunch of our clementines, and that's what she threw up. So she was gross, just couldn't eat it, couldn't do it. Okay. So I think it's interesting to think about this, because when I try to explain to parents, or even just like thinking about it from my own perspective to try to give my children a little more grace when they're being picky, I think about, if I go to a buffet, I typically don't just dig in, especially if there's a lot of food that I don't have familiarity with. I don't just dig in and start like shoving it in my mouth. So I might go, and first for me, it's smell. I think about, I sort of have this experience of like, what's happening. I use my sense of vision, and I tend to look kind of like what Laura said, not necessarily worrying about what the rules are, but I want to see everything and kind of have a plan before I go and start filling my plate. And then I will go get my plate, and then I might put the things that I know first. So I will start with, usually like I like veggies and fruit. Those are safe for me. So I won't ever really start with meat. And then I'll maybe look at like the mixed salads, and I tend to like take a little bit, like mixed salad as in like casseroles, not necessarily like green salad. And I'll put a little bit on my plate, and then I go and sit down, and I don't just start eating the mixed casserole without doing anything. Then I might put my fork in it, and I feel around a little bit, like what's the texture? And then I might put it and look at it on my fork, and then I might smell it, and then I might taste it a little bit. And then if I like it, I'll eat it. And then if I like it a lot, then I'll eat the rest of it. And then I might do the same with the other foods. And then I might go back and have some more. If I don't like it, I don't eat it, and I don't get more. So I have that control as an adult. And I think that when we think about introducing new foods to our children, especially those that have already these restricted patterns, and what they can control is their environment and what they put in their mouth. And if something's unfamiliar to them and causes some of that anxiety that Laura was talking about, it is not something we can, easily expect for them to just immediately do. So I think I am just gonna hold on one second, because I'm talking about my children and they just came in the back.
No problem. And I do see, different questions coming in. Somebody talked about, their loved one like binge eating, and then they're vomiting. And, it's really challenging because, like she mentioned, I don't want to have to sit there and babysit, like handing him one thing or her one thing at a time to eat. I get that. And we want to think about like, what are some natural ways that we can embed a delay in eating? Some of the things are teaching your loved one to take a sip after, right? To how many bites should they, how many chews should they take before they swallow? Having a conversation, like, what do I need to do? Putting my utensils down between every bite. So thinking about some natural behaviors that we can start embedding in there to help them make it more natural. So you're not having to babysit necessarily every time they eat. But at first, unfortunately, we do have to babysit. We have to make sure that we're doing that. We want to pick a meal time that we can actually do this. So if it's dinner time, when you feel like I'm not rushed, I can sit there for the hour, I can watch, I can model, like that should be the mealtime that you're working on these behaviors. And then over time, it'll start to what we call generalize, and they'll start to recognize that they're going to do this in the morning and with other meals. But we want to think about adding those delays, maybe helping them, setting a timer, anything you can do to help them, what we call self-monitor, to say, how fast am I eating? Why do I need to slow down? What are the consequences here? Verbalizing and articulating those things, but building in things that'll be natural to help them slow down.
Yeah, those are really good suggestions. Sorry about that. Hopefully my children will not come in again. So when we're thinking, my sense of anxiety has gone up. So when we're thinking about the buffet example, I heard and thought myself about the 5 senses. So smell, sight, that was one for me. Sound was the big one for Flip. That was the first thing that she noticed. And I think then caused maybe some of that overwhelm. And then obviously the sense of taste and touch. So those are the 5 senses that we all think about. And those that are on this call, probably a lot of you have heard of these other senses that I'm going to talk about. But if not, what as OTs we really emphasize is there are 3 other senses. So we think of the sensory system as being 8 systems. And the 3 that I'm going to talk about are less talked about because they're not those that you can see something of. You can't see your sense of interoception or vestibular or proprioceptive. So interoception is the internal sense of your organs and what those feel like. So when you feel your stomach growling and you're to be hungry, when you feel that anxiety, like Laura said, when she gets into the buffet and feels overwhelmed about what to do, When the child that always feels like they have to go to the bathroom, that's certainly a common thing with children that start to have anxiety, where they'll start to feel like they constantly have to go. So being able to sense your body and know what that means. Vestibular is the sense of your body movement and balance. So where your head is in space. If you think about being on a roller coaster or being upside down, if you have your eyes closed, you should be able to tell without looking that your head is upside down. And that's your sense of the vestibular sense. And then the sense of proprioception is the input to your muscles and joints that tell you where you are in space. So that sense is really important for when you're bringing a fork to your mouth. I think there was someone in the chat who talked about their child uses their fingers to feed themselves a lot. So considering, maybe that's maybe their sense of proprioception to use a fork or a spoon puts a lot more overwhelm on them because it's harder for them. And so that's why using their hand makes it easier. So keep those senses in mind, because they all come into play when we're thinking about the sensory experience of eating. Was there, I thought someone said something. Okay. And one thing that I think a good analogy that's really helpful to think about when you're thinking about the sensory systems is imagining that you have a cup for each of those eight sensory systems I was talking about. And for me, my olfactory cup might be a lot smaller than for Flip's, and Flip's might have a really small auditory cup. She said that was the first thing that stood out to her. So for her, 2 drops of auditory input are gonna immediately throw her over the edge. Whereas for me, I might have a more average cup or a larger cup for my auditory, and I can get a little bit more than her and not feel that overflow. But when it comes to smell, if there's overwhelming smells, my cup is going to overflow, and that could cause some disorganization. So when we think of someone that's over responder, we think about an easier way to think about it is that their cup is smaller to begin with, and different settings and different life states or different interoceptive feelings. So if you're feeling anxious, your cup might get even smaller because you've already had that heightened sense of feeling overwhelmed. Somebody that's under responsive in a sensory system might need a lot more to fill their cup. So some of those situations where children are overstuffing or putting a lot of things in their mouth and not really knowing where it is, they might have less of a response to proprioceptive input, to that feeling of where their mouth is in space, so that they are continuing to put more and more in to get their cup to fill so that they can feel where their food is. And this is a very oversimplified way of talking about it. It certainly does not mean that if that's what your child does, that this is what's happening, but it's a way that it could be possibly why some of these things are behaviors you're seeing. And then for someone who's a sensory seeker or sensory craver, I think of them as having a more of a leaky cup. So they can feel the input right away in all of their senses, but as soon as they get it, it kind of leaks out, and they need to get more and more and more. So this is not a solution to some of the feeding challenges we're talking about, but it's helpful to remember that we all have different states of sensory processing, and that this could be something to keep in mind when you're thinking about some of the challenges you're having in eating. What I really like to think about is this model right here. It's a very common theoretical model that OTs use called the PEO model. So the person or the child, the environment, the occupation or the task or activity, and then the in between of those is the occupational performance. So when we're thinking about eating, the occupational performance is eating. And what I would really urge all of you on this call, whether it's that your child is really restrictive or that you're having challenges with overeating, is that you really look at the environment, because I think we tend to look first at the child. And I agree that there are times when we need to do a lot of the things to help make a child less sensitive to things or more tolerant of things. But often if you think about things from a sensory perspective, there might be things you can do to help make the environment less sensory overwhelming or underwhelming, or whatever the case might be when you start kind of considering their senses. And potentially, could that change how this is happening? If we make some changes here, could we have a better occupational performance of feeding? So That first example of the child that takes a really long time to eat, the 2 to 3 hours to eat, and you're using the plate to separate the food. That's a great, I would say, like, activity adaptation. But consider the environment. Is there a lot of noise going on because everybody is stressing about like what's happening? There is probably stuff happening that's causing their sense of interoception to be like really high because they're feeling anxious. Is there something that you could do in the environment to give them more sense of control over their body, like maybe seating kind of thing? Maybe they need more stability in their core when they're sitting. Maybe they're standing up to get up because they need that sense of vestibular, their movement. They need that movement. So maybe allowing standing while they're eating, thinking about seating options. So those are definitely not magic bullets, but just kind of a different way to look at things is very helpful. And not being afraid to use tools when you're going into a new environment for a child that really needs that control. So if you need headphones to help with that, if Flip needs to wear headphones when she goes into Sizzler, then that's fine. And it's okay. And that might make her more willing to try some of those new foods. Do you want to talk about some behavior things, Tara?
Sure. I think, I did talk about the strategies. We just put a couple of things, bullets here, but we always want to rule out any medical concerns or issues. So if your loved one is underweight or overweight, we want to, talk to the doctor. We need to work with the medical field on that. If you find that they just are constantly hungry, what is causing that? Is there something that we need to rule out before we try to tackle it via the environment? We always want to take steps toward tasting. And what that means is, like I said before, putting the items on their plate, right? Giving them choices. Do you want to have, banana, or do you want to have, peanut butter today? Which one? All right, it's going to sit on your plate next to your preferred, foods, and just having them accept it there at first, and then moving it toward and shaping it. Now I'm going to have to touch it. Now I'm going to have to put it in my mouth. Now I'm going to have to eat it. We always want to expose them to many new things, and repeat that. It's not because they said no today that they're going to say no tomorrow or later that day. So continue to expose and repeat them to those new items and foods, something old and something new, giving them something that they're familiar with before introducing them to something that's very unfamiliar, or something that is similarly looking, smelling, tasting, whatever it is, any way that it's similar to a food that they're used to or prefer. You want to tune into those textures. Obviously, we know that there's individuals that just have issues with certain textures. So maybe, not starting with something that if your loved one can't do applesauce, I wouldn't start with those foods that are more pureed. Let them play with new food. Let them have that exposure to it. Take the pressure off of them. It's, you can imagine, we talked about having anxiety just by walking into a buffet. How much anxious behaviors are we causing and feelings are we causing when we say you have to try these new things and you're going to sit here with me and you've got to eat them slower and you've got to do it by this time limit and you can't take big bites, and all of this pressure that we put on them. And we just want to let them know, it's okay. We want to help you to get through this, and this is why we want to do it. We want to tell them the why. It's not just because I say so. It's because this is what's going to help you to be healthy, to grow up big and strong, right? To be able to do and be active your whole life and minimize illness and sickness. And then always offering those choices and control. The more that we can give them in the control aspect is going to be very helpful, I think, for them. And I want to ask you, Lauren, I see a parent, she's mentioned this twice now. She's got a 5-year-old autistic son that is, very wet, constantly with the drooling, doesn't want to accept the new foods. What can she do to help with just the wetness? And you talked about some of the cups earlier. Is there anything that they can do to minimize that so that he can ingest the foods? I don't know if it's the saliva that's causing the issue. He doesn't want to swallow it.
Okay, so he doesn't want to swallow it. And I'm wondering if he's pulling the saliva because it's giving him that proprioceptive input to his mouth. So he's kind of using it as a tool to give him that feedback. And whether you did things like, and I don't know, I did see a question, I'm sorry, there's been I tried to scan the chat about chewing, and that's sort of a separate thing. If someone has oral motor issues where they are not able to chew, that's kind of a whole other talk. But if you gave some crunchy things kind of as a warm-up, is that someone, how old did they say?
5.
Trying gum, trying sucking through, if he's able to suck through a straws are really they give a lot of proprioceptive input. So not even thinking about feeding challenges, but when I talk to parents with children that have need a lot of that proprioceptive input in the morning, we'll suggest doing straws with something thick in them, because you have to really pull yogurt or like like a protein shake or something, you have to really pull it out, and it provides some of that input. And then when you think about when we have infants, we use pacifiers and they suck their thumb. I mean, my 3-year-old still sucks her thumb, and it's very soothing. It gives that proprioceptive input. So potentially thinking about things like that. And also I have on here, I didn't really talk about this, but the mindfulness and the body scans. This is more for some of those older kids, but who are able to cognitively kind of think through that. But you could start early with children with yoga kinds of things and breathing, giving that awareness to what our body feels like, and like, where in my body am I feeling this certain tug or this itch or this tickle, and trying to start becoming more aware of it, because that can help, one, with that sense of interoception, and which can help with those hunger cues, but also to understand maybe like I'm not getting enough of that proprioceptive input somewhere else. And then I wanted to mention co-regulation, because I think that this has come up a lot with the anxiety that we as caregivers have when in any of these food battles, whether it's overeating or restricting. We obviously have a lot of anxiety around that. And I think as a society, food is a great thing, but it also causes a lot of issues. So really considering how you as the caregiver or the parent or work with the client, how you're approaching the situation, because our children and adults with special needs especially are very usually aware of those cues. They can feel our energy, kind of, not to sound they can sense it. So trying to think about your own sensory state and taking your own deep breaths to help regulate your child. I think that goes along with that behavior modeling. Like, you want to be modeling what you want from them. So trying to calm yourself and realizing this is one situation and it's not the end of the world, and it's easy to say, but the more that we can kind of relax with it, it will kind of transfer over.
Thank you. And we do have, a lot of great comments and other parents kind of suggesting things for other parents. One parent recommended, said that her child who had this drooling was actually had a medical issue and had to have their adenoids and tonsils removed. And this is what really helped them. And from that, it addressed their snoring, teeth grinding, and night terrors. So that's just amazing. You wouldn't imagine just getting your tonsils and your adenoids out could cure all of that, right? But for some of us, that's what we wish for. Like, if I could just remove this, would it take all of this away? And in some instances, it probably can.
Yeah. And I think that, that makes me think of thinking about their tone. So having a lower tone mouth. So children that tend to like have a more open mouth posture, that could be part of it as well. And again, that would indicate to me that maybe that's their sense of proprioception in their mouth is they need more. Their cup is a lot bigger, so they need a lot more to get to the top to feel it. What kinds of things you can do mouth exercises. Some like little tricks could be things like taping, kinesio taping, and that might be something if he's getting OT or speech that they could, or PT, they could work on kind of giving you some of that external sensory input that would help facilitate more lip closure, that could help facilitate that feeling in their mouth.
Did we have any other questions from Facebook or from, because we're getting close to our time. Do we have any other questions from the chat or from Facebook that we wanted to answer?
We had, I think Tara has been talking about it. Yeah, but a little bit about picky eating. So if a child only eats a couple of foods, how do you get them to start eating more? I think you mentioned it, but maybe if you could just
I did
share one or two
I'll
more.
share. So I started working with a 16-year-old at the time, and she ate several foods, one of which was wedding cake. She had to have a sheet cake with wedding icing. She didn't eat the cake, she ate the icing. She would eat macaroni and cheese from KFC, and she would eat 2 chocolate donuts from Dunkin' Donuts. Those were her meals. That's what she ate. She was 16. You can imagine the weight problems that we were dealing with. She had diabetes. She had all the things. And so I had to, and she was so large, tall as well. My point being that she was able to bully her family into giving her these things because she could break bones, and she did. And so they were very fearful, and they said, well, she has to eat something, and otherwise she's going to beat us up. So what do we do? And so it really came down to me explain. She was nonverbal, but me explaining the why. She understood what I'm saying, but also I restricted that. So if you want this mac and cheese, first you have to have these green beans. So they also had green bean choices at KFC. And I make her eat 2 or 3, and then I would give her 2 or 3 bites of the mac and cheese, and we would pair this off. And she was very aggressive. You know, it was very scary, but I have to hold my ground and let her know that I care for her. And this is why I'm doing it. We eliminated the sheet cake. We eliminated donuts. We were able to restrict that. And she was the one that actually now started eating the salad with ketchup over time. But it really is us having to deal with those behaviors to say no, and here's why, and this is what you have to do. And it was you can have this, but first you have this. And I didn't budge on it. And we would sit there for hours, and I would call restaurants and let them know we were coming. We had an Italian restaurant that would let us come in. They closed for the lunchtime, and we were able to practice. And I would have her sit with me, and we would practice waiting, mealtime, all of those things. You can find your community outreach that they're going to let you, work with them. When can I take them into your restaurant when it's going to be, not as busy? I'm going to be working with somebody that has food aversions and challenging behaviors. Can I come in? Some of them will tell you no. And some of them will say yes, absolutely. And so that's what we started doing. And I would wait her out. And it took time. It takes time, parents, like, to work through these challenging food issues. It's not going to be an overnight thing. You have to commit to say, I'm ready to do this. I'm willing, and do it when you can do it. Do it maybe over the summertime. I wouldn't suggest it over the Christmas holiday vacation. It's too stressful. Do it when you can dedicate the time to it, and start slowly implementing and fading in new strategies and new foods.
And I think thinking about the behavior and the sensory together, there's no way you can really separate them out, because often we might have a initial sensory reason for restricting or overeating or suddenly not liking a food. It could really have a sensory component, but then it becomes more behaviorally based. And that doesn't make it easier. It just is something to consider. So using the strategy kind of in tandem, where your first then is something that I use every day, all day with my own kids and my clients. It's important to really know that you're having to kind of make that decision to start the journey and stick with it.
Yeah, we've got to be consistent. We can't give in, and mom can't do it and then dad doesn't do it. Like, we're all on the same page. We are a team, and we're all going to work through this together. And every strategy we do, we agree to, and we're ready. We say when we're ready, and we really do it.
As a parent, I really appreciate these focuses on, sometimes we have to let it go. So Tara, you got somebody to start eating salad. Who cares if ketchup was what the topping was? It was so much more healthy. And so I think sometimes as parents, we really just have to let some of this go. Not be anxious ourselves. And so you have to find your space. Lauren talked about that a little bit. Something that I eventually ended up doing, and this might be helpful for other parents, is I also taught my children how to make salads, pour cereal, and make a sandwich. And so if we were having a dinner one night and they didn't want to eat what we were having because that's what we prepared, then they were free to get up and go make a salad or a sandwich. And then that way it was stress-free for me, but I also knew that those were options that have some really good nutrients to them.
That's a great idea.
Yes.
Wow.
Very good.
Well, this was very informative, you guys. A very interesting talk. I think I learned a lot. Want to switch to the next? Yeah, well, we're wrapping it up. So is there any other? Go back. This was the book you wanted to talk about, Lauren. You want to mention that?
Yeah, so I talked a little bit about interoception. Kelly Mailer is an OT that has written a whole curriculum on developing mindful self-regulation. So if this is something that's of interest to you, I would suggest it. The Two Sides of the Spectrum podcast has a ton of different people that come and talk, but these were just two that I picked out. One's about autism and interoception with Kelly Mailer, who wrote that book. And the other one on here is Affirming Approaches to Picky Eating. So that might be something that those of you that are dealing with that might be interested in hearing. And I know on that one, they specifically talk a lot about kind of that sense of like letting it go and giving control to your child and realizing and I obviously within constraints, whether it's a battle you want to pick. And then I think this is an article that's linked to Tara, something about
it was for binge eating. Yeah.
Okay. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And then this is just a blog post that I just added on here. It's actually from a website to to help wean children that have been tube fed their whole lives into eating. So it's more related to children that might have texture and like issues with taking in food in their mouth because they never have. But the blog post that I linked to has a good description of those senses that I talked about, and in kind of the same terms that I talked about for those that want it in writing.
All right, well, and if you switch to the next one, well, thank you. We'll put these resources also below. Maybe you guys can copy and paste them in the comment boxes.
Sorry.
And thank you, everybody, for being with us tonight, and thank you for all of our sponsors for being here. I think this is very interesting. It seems like we need to do another one on the same topic. But anyways, thank you all for being with us tonight, and we will send out the replay for anybody that missed it, and we will talk to you next time. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you, everybody.
Have a good night.
Bye.